Good morning. Today I will be reading from the Left Behind book. It's called Apollyon. And today I'm going to read to you chapter 7, and I'll begin to read now. Buck peeked in on Chloe before heading out with Chaim. She appeared sound asleep. "Do you mind driving?" Chaim asked. "It has been so long since I was allowed." Allowed? Chaim smiled wearily. "Once you become, how shall I say it, a personality in this country, especially in the city, you are treated like royalty. I cannot go anywhere unescorted. I was not even famous when first you did the cover story on me. You were revered, however." Chaim checked with his gate man Jonas for the latest word on Jacob. "Stefan," Buck heard him say. Then something urgent and frustrated in Hebrew. Chaim directed Buck to the last stall in the garage, and Chaim slid behind the wheel of an ancient sedan. "I don't want everyone to know I'm coming. The Mercedes is well known. You drive a stick shift, do you not?" Buck feathered the throttle and quickly caught on to the vagaries of the manual transmission. He worried about the bald state of the tires. "Any idea where we're going?" "Yes, I'm afraid I do," James said. "Jacob is an alcoholic." Buck shot him a double take. "You have an alcoholic as your driver?" "He's dry, recovering, they call it. But in times of crisis, he reverts." "Falls off the wagon?" "I do not know that expression." "It's an old Americanism. Early in the 20th century, the Women's Christian Temperance Union would roll the temperance wagon into town, decrying the evils of alcohol and calling on offenders to give it up and get on the wagon. When a sober man went back to drinking, it was called falling off the wagon." "Well, I'm afraid that is what has happened here," James said, pointing where Buck was to turn. As they moved into smaller neighborhoods, with houses and buildings closer together, Buck began noticing things he hadn't seen on the drive from James to the stadium. Jerusalem had grown seedy. How he had loved to visit this city just a few years before. It had had its rundown areas, but overall it had been kept with pride. Since the disappearances, certain types of crime and lewd activity had sprung up that he never expected to see in public here. Drunks staggered along, some with their arms slung around ladies of the evening. As Buck drove farther into the city, he saw strip clubs, tattoo parlors, fortune telling shops, and triple X rated establishments. "What has happened to your city?" Chain grunted and waved dismissively. "This is something about which I would love to speak to Nikolai. All that money spent on the new temple and moving the dome of the rock to the new Babylon. Ugh, this Peter the Second fellow wearing the funny costumes and welcoming the Orthodox Jew into the Enigma Babylon faith. I'm not even a religious man, and I wonder at the folly of it. What is the point? The Jews have maintained for centuries that they worship the one true God, and this somehow now fits with a religion that accepts God as man and woman and animal and who knows what else. And you see what effect it has on Jerusalem. Haifa and Tel Aviv are worse. The Orthodox are locked away in their gleaming new temple, slaughtering animals or going back to the literal sacrifices of centuries gone by. But what impact do they have on this society? None. Nikolai is supposed to be my friend. If he will see me, I will inform him of this, and things will change. When my Jacob, a wonderful spirited man, by the way, falls off the wagon, as you put it, he winds up on the same street, in the same bar, and in the same condition." "How often does this happen?" "Not more than twice a year. I scold him, threaten him, have even fired him, but he knows I care for him. He and his wife, Hannelore, still grieve over two little ones they lost in the disappearances." Buck was realizing he had pushed Jacob spiritually without getting to know him. He just hoped Chaim was wrong about Jacob and that they would not find him where the old man expected to. Chaim pointed Buck to a parking place in the middle of the row of cars and vans that lined a crowded street. It was after midnight now, and Buck was suddenly overcome with fatigue. The harem, he said, reading the neon sign. You sure this is only a bar? I'm sure it is not, Cameron, Rosenzweig said. I don't want to think about what else goes on in there. I've never been inside. Usually I wait out here while my security chief goes in and drags Jacob out. That's why I'm here? I would not ask you to do that, but you may need to help me with him because if he resists, I am no match for him. He will not hurt me even when drunk, but a little old man cannot make a thick mule of a young man go anywhere he does not want to go. Buck parked and sat thinking. I'm hoping you're wrong, Dr. Rosenzweig. I'm hoping Jacob will not be here. James smiled. You think because he became a believer he will not get drunk after being shot at? You are too naive for an international journalist, my friend. Your new faith has clouded your judgment. I hope not. Well, you see that green truck there, the old English Ford, Buck nodded. That belongs to Stefan of my ballet staff. He lives between here and Teddy Kolik Stadium, and he is Jacob's drinking partner. Stefan does not suffer as Jacob does. He can hold his liquor, as we like to say. He was off work today, but if I was a man of wagers, I would bet Jacob ran to him while escaping the global community guards. Naturally shaken and scared out of his wits, he no doubt allowed Stefan to take him to their favorite place. I cannot hold this against Jacob, but I want him safe. I don't want him making a spectacle of himself in public, especially if he is a fugitive from the GC. I don't want him to be here, Dr. Rosenzweig. I don't either, but I am not a young man with stars in his eyes. Wisdom is supposed to come with age. Cameron, I wish less came with it, frankly. I have gained wisdom. I cannot now recall. I have what I call mature moments where I recall in detail something that happened 60 years ago, but cannot remember that I told the same story half an hour before. I'm not even 33 yet, and I have my share of those. James smiled. And your name again was? Let's go look for Jacob, Buck said. I say he's not in there, even if Stefan is. I hope Jacob is, James said, because if he is not, that means he is lost or caught or worse. Dr. Floyd Charles's story was so similar to Rayford's that it was eerie. He too had had a wife serious about her faith, while he, a respected professional, played at the edges of it. Fairly regular church attendee, Rayford asked from experience, just didn't want to get as deep into it as your wife. Exactly, Floyd said. She was always telling me any good works wouldn't get me into heaven, and that if Jesus came back before I died, I'd be left behind. He shook his head. I listened without hearing, you know what I mean. You're telling my story, brother. You lose kids too? Not in the rapture. My wife miscarried one, and we lost a 5-year-old girl in a bus accident her first day of school. Floyd fell silent. I'm sorry, Rayford said. It was awful, Floyd said with a thick voice. Gigi and I both saw her off at the corner that morning, and LaDonna was happy as she could be. We thought she would be shy or scared. In fact, we kind of hoped she would be, but she wouldn't wait to start school with her new outfit, lunchbox, and all. Gigi and I were basket cases, nervous for her, scared. I said putting her on that big old impersonal bus made me feel like I was sending her off to face the lions. Gigi said we just had to trust God to take care of her. Half an hour later, we got the call. Rayford shook his head. Made me bitter, Floyd said. Drove me farther from God. Gigi suffered, sobbed her heart out till it almost killed me. But she didn't lose her faith, prayed for LaDonna, asked God to take care of her, to tell her things, all that. Real strain on our marriage. We separated for a while. My choice, not hers. I just couldn't stand to see her in such pain, and yet still playing the church game. She said it wasn't a game, and that if I ever wanted to see LaDonna again, I'd get right with Jesus. Well, I got right with Jesus, all right. I told him what I thought of what he let happen to my baby girl. I was miserable for a long time. They sat at the kitchen table where Rayford could hear Hattie's steady, rhythmic breathing. You know what convinced me? Floyd said suddenly. Rayford snorted. Besides the rapture, you mean? That got my attention. I was actually convinced before then. I just never pulled the trigger. Know what I mean? Rayford nodded. You knew your wife was right, but you didn't tell God? Exactly. But what convinced me was Gigi. She never stopped loving me through it all. I was a rascal man, mean, nasty, selfish, rude, demeaning. She knew I was grieving and suffering. The light had gone out of my life. I loved LaDonna so much, it was as if my heart had been ripped out. But when I was trying to cover the pain by working all hours and being impossible to my coworkers and everyone else, Gigi knew just when to call or send a note. Every time, Rayford, every stinking time, she would remind me that she loved me, cared about me, wanted me back, and was ready to do whatever I needed to make my life easier. Wow. Wow is right. She was hurting just as bad as I was. But she would invite me for dinner, bring me meals, do my laundry, and she was working too. Clean my apartment, he chuckled. Humiliated me is what she did. She won you back? She sure did. Even lifted me out of my grief. It took a few years, but I became a happier, more productive person. I knew it was God in her life that allowed her to do that, but I still thought that if there was anything this heaven and hell business, God would have to look kindly on me because I was helping people every day. I even had that right motive. Oh, I loved the attention, but I helped everybody. I did my best work, whether the patient was a derelict or a millionaire. Made no difference to me. Somebody needed medical attention. They got my best. Good for you. Yeah, good for me. But you and I both know what it got me when Jesus came back, left behind. Floyd checked on Hattie. Rayford got them cokes from the refrigerator. I don't want to badmouth an old friend, Rayford said, but I suggest you think about the kind of woman your wife was before you consider Hattie as a replacement. Floyd pursed his lips and nodded. I'm not saying Hattie couldn't become that kind of person, Rayford added. I know, but there's no evidence she wants to be. Know what I'm going to do? Rayford said, rising. I'm going to call my daughter and tell her I love her. Floyd looked at his watch. You know what time it is where she is? I don't care, and she won't either. Buck and Chaim got stares from both men and women as they approached the harem. The place was much bigger inside than it looked from outside. Several rooms, even packed with people shoulder to shoulder, some dancing, some kissing passionately, led to the main bar where women danced and people ate and drank. Ah, Rosenzweig said, just as I thought. As they made their way in, Buck looked carefully for Jacob and averted his eyes every time he was met with a "What are you looking at?" glare. Not all the couples were made up of both sexes. This was not the Israel he remembered. The smoke was so thick that Buck knew he'd have done less damage to his lungs if he himself was smoking. Buck did not realize Chaim had stopped in front of him, and he bumped into the old man. Oh, Stefan, Rosenzweig chided, and Buck turned in time to see a young man with a sloshing drink in his hand. His dark hair was wet and matted, and he laughed hysterically. Buck prayed he was alone. Is Jacob with you? Rosenzweig demanded. Stefan, in mid-crackle, could barely catch his breath. He bent over in a coughing jag and spilled some of his drink on Rosenzweig's trousers. Stefan, where's Jacob? Well, he's not with me, Stefan shouted, straightening up and laughing more. But he's here, all right. Buck's heart sank. He knew Jacob had been sincere in his conversion, and God had proved it with the seal on his forehead. How could Jacob desecrate his own salvation this way? His brush with the GC been more gruesome than Buck could imagine? Where? Rosenzweig pressed, clearly disgusted. In there, Stefan pointed with his drink, laughing and coughing all the while. He's up on a table having the time of his life. Now let me through so I don't have an accident right here. He lurched off, laughing so hard tears ran down his face. Chaim, appearing overcome, strained to see the main room from which music blared and strobe lights flashed. Oh no, he moaned, backing into Buck. He's totally drunk. This shy young man who hardly looks you in the eye when he greets you is carrying on in front of everyone. I can't take this. I'll bring the car up. Could you just get him down off the table and drag him out? You're bigger and stronger than he is, please. Buck didn't know what to say. He'd never been a bouncer, and while he had once enjoyed the nightlife himself, he had never liked loud bars, especially ones like this. He jostled past Chaim as the old man hurried out. Buck shouldered his way through several clusters of revelers until he came to dozens where attention was on that crazy young Israeli holding forth atop a table. It was Jacob, all right. Rayford hurried to the basement and found Ken with Donnie Moore's telescope in his lap and his microscope on his desk. Ken was reading Donnie's technical journals. Kid was a genius, Ray. I'm learning a ton that's going to help us. If you can get this stuff to your other pilot and your inside techie over there, they can have us up to speed when their cover is blown and we're all just trying to stay alive. What can I do for you? I want to go with you Friday to Israel. You barely escaped. Didn't your friend Max say you were as good as dead if you had stayed? It's not like me to run. I can't hide from Carpathia for the rest of my life anyway, short as it may be. What the heck got into you, Ray? Just talked with Chloe. I smell trouble. No way Nikolai is going to let them out of Israel alive. We have to go get them. I'm game. How do we do it? Buck quit excusing himself. He was being cursed anyway. Finally, he was close enough to hear Jacob, but he was railing in Hebrew, and Buck understood none of it. Well, almost none. Jacob was shouting and gesturing and trying to keep people's attention. They laughed at him and seemed to curse him, whistling and throwing cigarette butts at him. Two women splashed him with their drinks. His face was flushed and he looked high, but he was not drinking, at least then. Buck recognized the word Yeshua, Hebrew for Jesus, and Hamalak, the word for Messiah. What's he saying? He asked a man nearby. The drunk looked at him as if he were from another planet. English, Buck pressed. Kill the English, the man said, and the Americans too. Buck turned to others. English, he asked. Anyone know English? I do, a barmaid said. She carried several empties on a tray. Make it quick. What's he saying? She looked up at Jacob. Him? Same thing he's been saying all night. Jesus is the Messiah. I know. He saved me. All that nonsense. What can I tell you? The boss would have thrown him out long ago, but he's entertaining. Jacob was little more than entertaining. His motive might have been pure, but he was having zero impact. Buck moved close and grabbed his ankle. Jacob looked down. Buck, my friend and brother, this man will tell you. He was there. He saw the water turn to blood and back again. Buck, come up here. Let's go, Jacob, Buck said, shaking his head. I'm not coming up there. No one is listening. Come on. Rosenzweig is waiting. Jacob looked amazed. He is here? Here? Have him come in. He was in. Now let's go. Jacob climbed down and eagerly followed Buck out, accepting cheers and slaps on the back from the merrymakers. They were near the front door when Jacob spotted Stefan heading the other way. Wait, there's my friend. I must tell him I'm leaving. He'll figure it out, Buck said, steering him out the door. In the car, Rosenzweig glared at Jacob. I was not drinking, doctor, he said. Not one drop. Oh, Jacob, Rosenzweig said as Buck pulled away from the curb. The smell is all over you, and I saw you atop the table. You can smell my breath, he said, leaning forward. I don't want to smell your breath. No, come on, I'll prove it. Jacob breathed heavily into Rosenzweig's face, and Chaim grimaced and turned away. Rosenzweig looked at Buck. He had garlic today, but I do not smell alcohol. Of course not, Jacob said. I was preaching. God gave me the boldness. I am one of the 144,000 witnesses, as Rabbi Ben Judah says. I will be an evangelist for God. Chaim slumped in his seat and raised both hands. Oi, he said, I wish you were drunk. After hearing what had gone on behind the scenes in Israel, Ken agreed it was likely Carpathia would manufacture some tragedy outside his control, something he can blame on somebody else. But no matter how you slice it, people we care about are going to die. I don't want to be foolhardy, Ken, Rayford said, but I'm not going to hide here and just hope they get out. I've been skyjockeying that son-in-law of yours since the disappearances, and you'd have to go some to be more foolhardily than that boy. We're going to have to get in touch with your co-pilot over there. Enough. I can teach you a lot about the Gulf Stream, but nobody can put it down without a runway. Meaning, you're going to be looking at a quick pickup, right? Probably from this Rosen whatever estate. Yeah, I'm going to suggest to Tyson that he announce plans for Saturday, something Carpathia will believe he wouldn't want to miss. Then we get in there after midnight Friday and get them out of there. Unless they meet us somewhere near the airport, we're going to have to drop in and get them. And that means a chopper. Can't we rent one? I could ask David Hassed, our guy inside the GC, to have one waiting for us at Jerusalem or Ben Gurion. Fine, but we're going to need 2 flyers. No way McCollum can get away to help us. What am I, chop liver? Ken smacked himself in the head. Listen to me, he said. What an idiot. You're trained in a copter then? Mac brought me up to speed. I land near the complex and shuttle them to you at the airport, right? You'd better get a layout of the place before we go. You're going to have precious little time as it is putting one of them noisy jobs down in a residential area. Somebody sees you in their yard, they'll be there before you can get airborne again. Does your wife know where you've been? Rosenzweig asked Jacob as Buck pulled in front of his apartment building. I called her. She wants to know what in the world I'm talking about. Why did you go to that awful place first? I escaped to Stefan's house. He wanted to go. I thought, what better place to start preaching? You're a fool, Rosenzweig said. Yes, I am. Buck tossed Jacob his cell phone. Call your wife so you don't scare her to death when you walk in. But before Jacob could dial, the phone rang. What's this? He said. I didn't do that. Push send and say Buck's phone. It was Chloe. She needs to talk with you right away, Mr. Williams. Buck took the phone and told Jacob, wait here until we can warn your wife you're coming. Chloe told Buck about the call from her father and his request for a schematic of Rosenzweig's estate. I'll bring it up when it's appropriate, Buck whispered. Later, when he finally drove through the gates at James' place, the time didn't seem right to raise the issue of the schematic. Rosenzweig was still a Carpathia sympathizer and would not understand. He might even spill the beans. Buck remained in the car as Rosenzweig got out. You're not coming in? May I borrow your car for a while? Take the Mercedes? This will be fine, Buck said. If Chloe is still up, tell her she can call me. Where are you going? I'd rather not say. If you don't know, you don't have to lie if anyone asks. This is entirely too much skullduggery for me, Cameron. Be safe and hurry back, would you? You and your friends have another big day tomorrow, or I should say today. Buck drove straight to the Wailing Wall. As he expected, after the squabbling between the 2 witnesses and Carpathia and the threats Nikolai made on international television, huge crowds pressed near the fence where Eli and Moshe held court. The GC was well represented, armed guards ringing the crowd. Buck parked far from the Temple Mount and moseyed up like a curious tourist. Moshe and Eli stood back to back, with Eli facing the crowd. Buck had never seen them in that position and wondered if Moshe was somehow on the lookout. Eli was speaking in his forceful, piercing voice, but at that moment he was competing with the head of the GC guard unit and his bullhorn. The guard was making his announcement in several languages, first in Hebrew, then in Spanish, then in an Asian tongue Buck couldn't place. Finally, he spoke a broken English with a Hebrew accent, and Buck realized the GC guard was an Israeli. Attention, ladies and gentlemen. I have been asked by the global community's Supreme Commander to remind citizens of the proclamation from His Excellency Potentate Nikolai Carpathia. Here, the crowd erupted into cheering and applause that the 2 men you see before you are under house arrest. They are confined to this area until the end of the meeting of the witnesses Friday night. If they leave this area before that, any GC personnel or private citizen is within his rights to detain them by force, to wound them, or to exterminate them further. If they are seen anywhere, repeat anywhere after that time, they shall be put to death. The crowd near the fence cheered wildly again, laughed, taunted, pointing fingers, and spat toward the witnesses. But still, the crowd hung back at least 30 feet, having heard of, if not seen, those whom the witnesses had killed. While many claimed the two murdered people who got too close, Buck himself had been a mercenary soldier charged at them with a high-powered rifle. He was incinerated by a fire from the witness's mouth. Another man who had leaped toward them with a knife had seemed to hit an invisible wall and fell dead. The witnesses, of course, seemed unaffected by the proclamation or the guard with the bullhorn. They remained motionless and back to back, but there was a vast difference between how they now appeared and how they looked when Buck first saw them. Because of the incredible interest drawn to them by the meetings televised from Colic Stadium, and their being mentioned by both Leon Fortunato and Carpathian himself, the news media had converged upon this place. Gigantic cog lights illuminated the area, a glaring spotlight bathing the witnesses, but neither squinted nor turned from the glare. The extra light only served to emphasize their unique features: strong, angular faces, deep-set dark eyes, and craggy sockets under bushy brows. No one ever saw them come or go. None knew where they were from. They had appeared strange and weird from the beginning, wearing their burlap-like sackcloth robes and appearing barefoot. They were muscular and yet bony, with leathery skin, dark lined faces, and long scraggly hair and beards. Some said they were Moses and Elijah reincarnate, but if Buck had to guess, he would have said that they were the two Old Testament characters themselves. They looked and smelled centuries old, a smoky, dusty aroma following them. Their eyes were afire, their voices supernaturally strong and audible for a mile without amplification. An Israeli shouted a question in Hebrew, and the GC guard translated it into all the languages. He wants to know if he would be punished for killing these men now where they stand. The crowd cheered anew as each people group understood what he said. Finally, the GC guard answered, "If someone was to kill them this very night, he would be punished only if an eyewitness testified against him. I don't know that there are any eyewitnesses here at all." The crowd laughed and agreed, including the other guards. Buck recoiled. The GC had just given permission for anyone to murder the witnesses without fear of reprisal. Buck was tempted to warn anyone so foolish that he had personally seen what happened to previous would-be assassins, but Eli beat him to it. Barely moving his lips but speaking so loudly he seemed to be shouting at the top of his lungs, Eli addressed the crowd. "Come nigh, and question not this warning from the Lord of hosts. He who would dare come against the appointed servants of the Most High God, ye, the lampstands of the one who sits high above the heavens, the same shall surely die." The crowd and the guards stumbled back at the force of his voice, but they soon inched forward again. Taunting Eli erupted again. "Tempt not the chosen ones, for to come against the voices crying in the wilderness is to appoint one's own carcass to burn before the eyes of other jackals. God himself will consume your flesh, and it will drip from your own bones before your breath has expired." A wild, crackling man brandished a bulky, high-powered rifle. Buck held his breath as the man waved it above the crowd, and the rest screamed warnings at him. The weapon had a sight on the stock that identified it as a sniper's rifle with kill power from 1,000 yards. Why, Buck wondered, would a man with such a weapon risk showing it within reach of the witnesses and their proven power to destroy? The GC guard stepped between the man and the wrought iron fence, behind which the witnesses stood. He spoke to the man in Hebrew, but it was clear he did not understand. "English!" the man screamed, but he did not sound American. Buck couldn't make out his accent. "If you do this thing," the guard started over in English, "as a service to the global community, you must take full responsibility for the consequences. You said there were no eyewitnesses." "Sir, the whole world is watching on television and the internet." "Then I'll be a hero. Out of my way. The guard did not move until the man leveled the weapon at him. Then the guard skipped into the darkness, and the man stood alone, facing the fence and nothing else. The witnesses were gone. Threatened to burn my flesh, will you? The man raged. Face this firepower first, you cowards. The GC guard came back on the bullhorn, speaking urgently. We shall search the area behind the fence. If the two are not there, they are in violation of the direct order of the potentate himself and may be shot at will by anyone without fear of indictment. And that is the end of chapter 7. Next, we'll be reading chapter 8. And I thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.